All right, guys, another book review, and this one is something very special because this is a novelist that I have all the books to on my bookshelf, and I greatly admire this writer because he, different from other Spanish writers or even just writers in any genre, is that he defies genre. And who I'm talking about is José Saramago, and the novel I've just read, of course, you read by the title, is The Gospel According to Jesus Christ. I've noticed that not many people have reviewed this book by José Saramago on YouTube, on the book sphere, the book channels. They always review, if anyone on YouTube who does a book channel reviews a José Saramago book, it's going to be a few. It's either going to be his novel Blindness, which I have read that a few years ago, and I might do a review about that at some point too, or his sequel to the novel called Seeing. And I want to I'm probably going to read all of his novels, and I want to actually put reviews of all of them at some point whenever I have the chance. But he is a gifted writer. He has a unique style. He doesn't use quotation marks like Cormac McCarthy and other writers do, but he doesn't separate like dialogue between like paragraphs. He does it within the paragraphs, and the way he distinguishes a different person talking is he'll do a comma, and if someone else is talking from someone else, the next letter of the first word will be capitalized to show you that that's the different person speaking who's being addressed. And it's very simple once you get used to it, that's how his writing style is. But with all that out of the way, I just wanted to guys let you know that this novel, I don't even know how to describe it in some ways. This is beyond impressive. This is a sublime reading experience. This is one of the most impressive novels I have ever read. It is José Saramago's version, it's his story, it's his Jesus story. It's the gospel, but from Jesus's perspective. What's different about this, what's unique about this novel from other gospels, other gospels, but like Norman Mailer has written a novel about Jesus's gospel from his perspective as well. It's called The Gospel According to the Son, but that was written a few years later after this was published. But the difference between that and this novel is that, and also from all the gospels in which Jesus is mentioned, is that this focuses on Jesus's early years when he's a kid and he's growing up. And that's kind of the big thing that not many people have always wondered, that many theologians and thinkers and philosophers throughout the years have always thought, like, well, what was Jesus's growing up? How was that like, possibly? Because the three synoptic gospels and the Gospel of John and in the New Testament, they never mention his upbringing. They never they'll show the Gospel of Luke will show how he was born and what happened and all that, but it never goes beyond that. It's there's never any detail about how he was growing up. But this gives us a sort of history of his story. And what I love about this novel is that José Saramago, he knows his history. He knows the history of the Middle East around the time when when he was born, how the politics of the area was working around, how the Roman Empire was essentially not controlling, but essentially they were that Judea, essentially Jerusalem and Israel, was essentially part of the Roman Empire, and that the temple, the Jerusalem temple and all that, and how essentially Caesar and all that kind of stuff, and he gets all that down to a T. It's obvious that José Saramago has read the works of Josephus, he's done his research, but what makes this even more of an engaging novel is that José Saramago, this novel, when it was released in the early 1990s, it got so much, it was a controversy. The Catholic Church wanted it banned. José Saramago is from Portugal. He was I'm not sure if he was extradited or if he was essentially told we don't want you here in Portugal anymore because this is blasphemous what you've written, because Portugal is a big Catholic. I think the country of Portugal is very Catholic, like Spain next to it. And so, well, lo and behold, José Saramago was an atheist. He was a Marxist and an atheist, and But you would think that an atheist writing a novelization about the Jesus story would be somewhat disrespectful, but not really. What's really amazing about this is that he kind of makes you root for Jesus when he's growing up and when he goes on to be chosen. And that's the funny thing about this novel. Saramago goes into how Jesus, he'll use the Gospels that we have, the Synoptic Gospels and all that, later on in the novel. Like, it'll show like Jesus doing the things that are written in the Gospels, but he'll show how it got there and what made Jesus essentially do the things that are written in the Gospels from the different perspectives. Like whether it's the Gospel of Mark, in which Jesus's character is very mysterious and very cryptic. He's constantly asking his disciples, but who do you say I am? Who do the people say I am? And the disciples in the Gospel of Mark are constantly like, they're bewildered. They're just like, whoa, who is this guy? Like, we follow him and all that, but we're like, we doubt him a lot. And we're just like, whoa, what's this man? Who's he? How is he doing this? And the Gospel of Matthew is essentially written from a heavily Jewish perspective. And also the Gospel of John, did I say the Gospel of John? The Gospel of Matthew is written from a very Jewish perspective. That's why the Gospel of Matthew, more than the other four Gospels, the other three, has all of the, he'll essentially allude to Jesus said something or did something that is prophesied in the prophets from the Old Testament or the Tanakh. Whereas the Gospel of John is the most unique of the Gospels, which is why it's not considered a synoptic gospel, because it so deviates from the stories and the actions that Jesus took in the three synoptic gospels. That's led to scholars and historians over the years to bring out the synoptic problem, that the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke are essentially, they work together, or they didn't really work together. The Gospel of Mark was written first, and a few years later, at some point within that time, the authors of Matthew and Luke would take what Mark wrote and essentially use what he wrote to kind of make their own version of the gospel. And the Gospel of John is so far away from those three other gospels, because in the Gospel of John, unlike Mark, Jesus knows who he is. He claims to be like the Son of God. He's very certain of his own identity. But in the Gospel of Mark, he seems like he has no idea. He's constantly asking people, and he wants people to be quiet. Whereas in the Gospel of John, he wants people to be aware of the news and all of that, and he doesn't want to be secret about it. So there's that problem. And what Saramago does is he uses all the information that we have in the Gospels to kind of create a unique, believable story of how all the Gospels are essentially true in some respects, but are not in a way. And don't get me wrong, he's not making this a total realistic version of what happened, because he has dreams, he has oracles, he has like visions and miracles all throughout this. And what I find the most interesting about this novel is how Saramago portrays Jesus's childhood. Jesus's childhood is very interesting. He actually goes back to Bethlehem, and he essentially becomes an apprentice of who is a guy called the pastor. But in a way, the pastor is actually Satan when you continue on through the novel. Spoilers, by the way. But the pastor is Satan. And the pastor is really unique in how I find it weird that Saramago calls him pastor. Because, well, you know what? I'll get into it later when I get into like the most puzzling passage in this novel that comes at around the end. It's essentially when God reveals to Jesus his plan for what he wants Jesus to do to save humanity, and it's total irony. What I love about Saramago, I coined this for him. To me, Saramago is the patron saint of ironists, because he is just oozing with irony. He is a great thinker. He could look into text and understand philosophies and ideas and understand the contradictions and the essential absurdities of thought and stuff that's been going on for hundreds of years, and how we set up languages and how we work within ideas and language games. He's a big fan of Wittgenstein, who is all about the whole language game thing. And I know you guys hear me talk about Wittgenstein quite a bit, but I'm a big fan as well. But he kind of picks out the ironies and the contradictions of our language, of the problems we have with language and with cultures and ideas because of inconsistencies. But anyway, as a matter of fact, real quick, I'm such a big fan of Saramago that I have Harold Bloom's critical reviews or his critical insights. And I've actually read Harold Bloom's essay on the gospel according to Jesus Christ in here. And he actually kind of notices something really hilarious in the novel. I'm going to use it because it's right here. And here's a passage from the novel itself in which God is speaking to Jesus about his plan for him. And notice this. Harold Bloom says, God tells us in the gospel that he is dissatisfied with the small constituency provided by him by his chosen people, the Jews. And this is from the novel. This is God speaking to Jesus. For the last 4,004 years, I have been the God of the Jews, a quarrelsome and difficult race by nature. But on the whole, I have got along fairly well with them. They now take me seriously and are likely to go on doing so for the foreseeable future. So, you are satisfied, said Jesus. I am and I am not. Or I would be if it were not for the restless heart of mine, which is forever telling me, wow, well now, a fine destiny you've arranged after 4,000 years of trial and tribulation that no amount of sacrifice on altars will ever be able to repay. For you continue to be the God of a tiny population that occupies a minute part of this world you created with everything that's on it. So tell me, my son, if I should be satisfied with this depressing situation. Never having created a world, I'm in no position to judge, replied Jesus. True, you cannot judge, but you could help. Help in what way? To spread my word, to help me become the God of more people. I don't understand. If you play your part, that is to say, the part I have reserved for you in my plan, I have every confidence that within the next 6 centuries or so, despite all the struggles and obstacles ahead of us, I will pass from being God of the Jews to being God of those whom we will call Catholics, from the Greek. And what is my part you have reserved for me in your plan? That of martyr, my son, that of victim, which is the best role of all for propagating any faith and stirring up fervor. God made the words martyr and victim seem like milk and honey on his tongue, but Jesus felt a sudden chill in his limbs, as if the mist had closed over him, while the devil regarded him with an enigmatic expression which combined scientific curiosity with grudging compassion. What's really interesting about this passage, it's in the later part of the novel, is that this is when God, Yahweh, he expresses to Jesus, this is what I want you to do. This is my plan to stop being a God of just the Jewish people, of being for the Jewish people, and how we're going to expand it to be Catholics. José Saramago was a big critic of Catholicism, but in a way, what he's doing here is he's kind of making an ironic statement on how God, if the Jesus story from what we read in the Gospels is true, and if all the canonical Gospels, and if it was true that this is how it all happened, then that would essentially mean that how he portrays God in this can be somewhat believed in a way, because God essentially, if we are to take, and he even uses the same logic, the same language game that for centuries, this is something that essentially theologians have been speaking on for centuries. It's based on Augustinian thought, like Thomas Aquinas, all the main traditions of Christianity. They teach the whole idea that God is omniscient, he's omnipotent, he's time and being, he knows everything from the future to the past of what's going on now, he knows everything. So, if we are to take that as the case, then God, when he's talking to Jesus, would acknowledge that, hey, when I become the God of all people, I'm not going to be called that. I'm going to be called the God of what we call Catholics. And that is how we define, how we grow everyone into our bubble. This is a high irony on Saramago's part. And also, there's an even more creepier passage in this, in which Jesus, because he's a curious soul, and if we are to believe how Jesus is portrayed in the Gospels, he's constantly questioning the thought of like the scribes and the Pharisees and other people. He's constantly questioning them. When he's talking with God in this, and when God tells him about the plan, he's even questioning him, being like, well, if this is going to happen, what is the risk? What is the price that's going to be paid for you to make me the sacrifice. And God gives a litany, a whole, like Saramago goes to the whole way for God. He gives God the words of how he describes the martyrs, the endless list of martyrs throughout history that will lose their lives in brutal and despicable ways for this idea of Christianity. And if I can find it real quick, I want to read just a little excerpt from it, because it kind of goes, there's the irony about how God, who has this perfect plan and knows everything that's going to happen, he's essentially telling Jesus, in the future, these people are going to die for me, but it's necessary. It is absolutely necessary. He says, very well then, this is God, very well then, the church I mentioned will be established, but its foundation, in order to be truly solid, will be dug in flesh, its walls made from the cement of rumination, tears, agony, anguish, every conceivable form of death. And with that, he goes on a long litany of names. He'll say something like Agnes of Rome disemboweled, Agrosilla of Bologna crucified and impaled on nails, Alphege of Canterbury beaten to death with the shin bone of an ox, Anastasia of Sirmium burned at the stake and her breast cut off. He just goes on with all these names of people who actually exist in history from the church, who suffered greatly, who died because of this. And Jesus flips this on him at one point. He says, let me see, that's something you should ask yourself. Go on. So God continued. Oh, here it is actually. God, after giving a litany of people who are going to die for the religion, asks Jesus, he says, have you had enough? And God asks Jesus, and Jesus retorts, that's something that you should ask yourself, but go on. What Saramago is doing is he's making Jesus question God, like, hey, you're asking me if I'm all right with this, but why don't you ask yourself that? Because if you're the creator of the universe and you've set this all up, and you've just given me a litany of people who are going to die horrible deaths because of this plan, I think you're the one you should ask yourself that if you're okay with that. Saramago was a great ironist, and in this, God is essentially a very petulant, he doesn't care about other people's feelings. He even says in many cases that he doesn't care about how Jesus feels. He doesn't care if they don't like it. It's going to happen because, well, he's God. It has to happen like that. And so Saramago is flipping the narrative that many theologians and Christian thinkers and Christians of today are constantly saying, like, oh, well, God, like, no matter, like, God can do whatever he wants. His morality has nothing to do with how we view morality. He can have people killed or believe that it's okay, and it's his thing. And so Saramago takes that and he flips it on it, and he essentially puts it in the words that it's like, well, how would he be then if he were talking to Jesus? And in this, he gives us an idea, and it's absolutely stunning and horrific and irony, and it's just awesome. I love this novel, dude. José Saramago gets an aspect of Christianity and he just rolls with it, and he shows it its contradictions and its ironies and its weaknesses it's like he's criticizing the dogma. He's criticizing the dogma and the modes of thought and the theological modes of thought that have been created since Christianity became a thing. Because like I said, in the novel, he portrays Jesus himself as he's a human. He's humanistic. There's at one point when he's growing up, while he's working with Pastor Satan in Bethlehem, he's a teenager at this point. He says he has to go to Passover at the temple to sacrifice a lamb because that's what they had to do. That was what is at least attributed to the laws of Moses. And he's following it. But once he gets there, Jesus has a change of heart, and he's thinking, why am I going to slaughter this innocent little lamb? And he starts thinking himself about the problems of what we have been taught, or what he has been taught in the religion and Judaism. And so he's growing up thinking about how, like, this isn't right. This little innocent little lamb, it's going to be sacrificed. And he even describes in it that he's like imagining the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of innocent lambs and doves and that have been sacrificed, and he imagines it as an ocean or a sea of blood that continues to grow, because that's how God intended it according to the scriptures of the Old Testament, or the Tanakh, as how it actually is. And it shows him as a curious thinker. And that's another thing. The dialogue in the whole novel, whenever two characters are discussing like philosophical problems or problems with the religion, he sets it up in Socratic dialogue. Saramago was a big fan of the Socratic dialogue method, and that's a way you can get to truth in many instances, because if you constantly are questioning each other about how you get to a position and where and how you get there, you can figure out if your logic is faulty or not. And if you, as you can see by all my notes, like this is a novel that is just filled to the brim with things you need to keep notes on. The blue tabs are philosophical inquiries. The red tabs are for intense or violent scenes. Yellow tabs are for character development, and the green tabs that you see that are overwhelming are passages of high irony. That's how ironic this novel is. It is just full to the brim of it. You can't go a single paragraph without a passage that is just full of irony. Anyway, guys, I know this has gone on for quite a long bit, and sorry if I'm being a bit long-winded, but this is just impromptu in my way, and I just wanted to let you guys know that this is a masterpiece. This is a masterpiece beyond words. Like, you can see I'm kind of struggling how to express I'm struggling to express how this novel is so great and what makes it, and how it's distinguished from the Gospels, and how Saramago adds his own unique ideas of like how the church has formed, and if God is this omnipotent being as we're supposed to believe in the church and such, that he had to essentially, if he was talking to Jesus at one point about his plan, he may have expressed it in this way because Jesus is a curious character. But it is just that good, people. I think people, if you're going to read Saramago, you need to read the Gospel According to Jesus Christ. It is beautiful. It is humanistic. It is also very much faithful to like ideas of like compassion. Like, it is just a great novel, people. You should totally read this. He is one of my favorite novelists of all time, and hopefully you guys will give this a check out. And the next review I'm probably going to be doing is actually going to be on David Bentley Hart's book, That All Shall Be Saved. It's a treatise on his idea of how that universalism, that Christianity, like universalist Christianity, which is the idea that everyone who dies will go to heaven, like everyone will be saved in the end. And it may be a different type of video. It may be one of my edited videos because it's very complicated, kind of like this, but I felt this would be all right with an impromptu. I may have messed up a little bit, but I'm sorry about that. But anyway, guys, check this out, and I'll catch up with you guys on my next video, which will be on David Bentley Hart's That All Shall Be Saved. Thank you.